and he creates his own offensive chance with that motor.
Krejci to Coyle, and the Leafs are mulched again!
Hello, welcome into the NESN Bruins Podcast. I'm NESN.com's NESN Bruins Podcast. I'm NESN.com's Mike Cole, joined as always by NESN.com's Logan Mullen. It's been so long, or at least it feels like it has. I forgot the name of our own podcast. But Logan, we are on respective locations as this is the new norm. We have socially distanced, yet we are still efforting to bring the Bruins, NESN Bruins Podcast to all of our faithful listeners.
Yeah, that's correct. And usually we joke that it's been a while since we've seen each other, but we literally have not seen each other in weeks now.
It's been a while.
At least 2 weeks, right? Give or take.
I guess. I literally, like, that's the thing. I have no idea. Like, my sense of time is gone at this point. I think I'm preaching to the choir with literally everybody else, the entire world at this point. I don't think anybody has really any idea of where we're at with time frames and such. But I guess that's the new norm for now. This is just it's taking some getting used to say the least. But we're doing our best.
We're about to figure it out.
Yeah, and it could be worse. It could obviously be worse. So. You and I are both healthy, as far as we know, healthy enough to bring some spicy Bruins takes and NHL takes to the internet and into people's ear holes. That being said, I'm not. We have a tentative schedule that we're going to kind of run through here, a tentative rundown of what we're going to talk about. But there's not a lot to talk about because there's no hockey at the moment. We don't know when or if hockey will be back for the 2020 season. We'll get into that a little bit later. We'll kind of discuss some of the machinations and scenarios that we can finish this season and still award the Stanley Cup. But I think it's understood, and we'll get into a little bit more. We're putting the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse.
Cart before the horse. You want the horse in front of the cart.
Right, yeah. And I think the horse at this point is getting everybody healthy and safe. So until that happens, we obviously all understand that hockey kind of takes a back seat. But all that being said, let's talk a little hockey. And we'll start with a story that you wrote for NESN.com. Was it last week? You wrote it?
Saturday. Friday night.
Friday, whenever, no better time.
Not like I was leaving my house. So.
No better time to put out internet content than on a Friday night in the middle of a global pandemic. People are going to read it. So you put your NHL Award predictions, I guess, was
I wouldn't even say predictions because some of it's not really how I think it's going to go, most likely. But it would be if I had if I was allowed to vote, which I think after this story I might not be allowed to vote. This is how I would roll. So that's pretty much where I landed here.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that that they're not going to probably. I mean, I think we.
It's tough to envision them finishing the regular season.
Yeah, exactly.
So. And that was kind of where my head was.
Right.
Was these are regular season awards? The regular season most likely is not going to happen, or the remainder of the regular season most likely is not going to happen. Even if it does, it probably won't be enough. Like, it's not going to happen in the next 2 weeks, right? I think April 4th or something like that was the last day of regular season games. Like, we're not going to get enough of a sample size in there to, at least in my opinion, dramatically alter where we stood by the time the season was paused. So I figured it was as good a time as any to say, well, people are itching for hockey stuff and we have something, a body of work to go off of. So that was kind of the thought process here.
Great. All right. Where do you want to start? Hart Trophy?
I guess so. Yeah.
All right. This one took me by surprise. So you got winning the Hart.
I have Artemi Panarin winning the Hart Trophy. Now I try and make sure to actually think about who is the most valuable to their team. Now, it's kind of tough I felt like a real dink doing this because you basically have to make cases against other guys, right? So I have a very hard time making a case against Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon and David Pastrnak. But in terms of guys who, in my opinion, almost single-handedly elevated their team, what Artemi Panarin did for the Rangers this season cannot be overlooked. I mean, and the Rangers are barely out of a playoff spot when the season freezes. And considering the changes that they did make now, fully acknowledging the fact that they had some good goaltending come out of the clouds with their two youngsters in Georgiev and Shesterkin, but Panarin, his addition not only transformed them offensively, but he was a fine enough defensive player too. And that was kind of what helped sell it for me, was the fact that Draisaitl is a classic case of a guy whose defense comes with his offense, right? Like when he's going through colder streaks, he's a pretty useless defensive player. He's not that great defensively in the first place. But I feel pretty confident saying the Rangers are well out of a playoff position if they don't bring in Panarin this season. And the offensive numbers are what they are: 32 goals, 63 assists. That's in 69 games. It's 20 more points than Mika Zibanejad, who is the next closest. And the thing that I used to kind of sell my argument as a whole was I looked at who pretty much every contender's most common line mates are, right? So David Pastrnak's playing with Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand. Nathan McKinnon is playing with Gabriel Landeskog and Mikko Rantanen. Now, both of them were injured for stretches of the season, but nevertheless, he had some pretty good line mates. Draisaitl and McDavid most often played together, and with Zach Kassian as well, who had, from Zach Kassian standards, a pretty good offensive season. Now, Panarin started playing with Zibanejad and Pavel Buchnevich. His most common line mates, though, by the time we reached mid-March, was Ryan Strome and Jesper Fast, who Strome's probably a bottom to middle six center at best, and Jesper Fast is a good one, but a career fourth liner. And Panarin still had the productivity that he did. So for me, in terms of a guy who is most valuable to his team, again, Connor McDavid's the most talented player in the NHL, but in terms of a guy that's most important and most impactful to his team, I had to go with Panarin.
Sure. Yeah. In the number you're talking with, comparing him to Zibanejad, those numbers are probably even more slanted in Panarin's favor, if you want to call it that. He scored 5 goals like 2 weeks ago in a game. So those numbers probably even jumped even more.
No, Zibanejad did play 12 fewer games because he was hurt, but still.
I went with Nathan McKinnon, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm probably leaning a little bit too much on early season storylines with that.
He kept the Avalanche alive at the beginning of the year.
And I think that's going to be a theme to some of my picks is I tend to put a little more value on the value, if that makes any sense. In a lot of these, we'll get to that with our Vesna picks as well. But I just look at the injuries and everything that they went through early on in the season. He's just been so consistent all season long. They are in a position they were in a position to maybe go on a run. So I just look at what he's done. He's 93 points in however many games it's been. It's just he's been their rock, and it sounds corny, but I think I like I said, especially. I don't know how voting kind of changes with this, but for me, I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on the whole year and just how valuable he was to that team. And I think McKinnon is that guy. So
if you asked me at the New Year, he probably would have been my pick, especially because he had played so much of the season without Landeskog and Rantanen.
Right.
Like he proved that he could stand alone. And credit to Leon Draisaitl too, who played a little bit without Connor McDavid as well this season.
Yeah, Draisaitl is going to get screwed in this whole thing, I think, because
look at the Art Ross.
Yeah, it's true. The numbers are insane, but I think it's just there's such an easy disqualification for him where you're just like yeah, but
Yeah, and it's tough because how much he can't choose who he plays with, right? So some of it's just out of his control. But you slap whoever else on his line with Kassian, like it's a I don't want to say it's a glorified third line, but that's he's probably not putting up the same numbers that he does without McDavid.
Probably not. All right, where do you want to go next?
Norris.
Okay, what you got?
I had Roman Josi.
It's a 2-horse race, right? Like
it's him and Carlson, right?
Josi or John Carlson, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would say that it depends on how. I don't know. This may make me a bit of a purist, but John Carlson is not a great defender. He is a very middle of the road to below average defensive defenseman. The point totals are great. They are what they are. But in terms of an overall ability, my thing was that Yossi's offensive drop-off, I think he was 10 points behind Carlson when the season paused. Yossi had 65 points to Carlson 75, and Yossi's a much more complete player as a whole and a complete defensive player. So for me, it's tough to ignore the offensive production that Carlson had, especially right out of the chute too. Like, people were talking Hart Trophy for John Carlson back in November, December, which you make of that what you will. But I think in terms of the most, not necessarily talented, I guess, but most impactful defenseman in the NHL, to me, it was Josi.
Yeah, and he's getting paid like it too. So
yeah, he is, and he responded well to getting the contract extension during the year. It didn't really slow him down all that much at the beginning of the year, and then he got hashed out and was good to go.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Carlson. I was looking at it and I was crunching some of the numbers, and they're probably closer, him and Josi, that I'd like to admit for the sake of this argument. But I was looking it up. So if he played 82 games, he'd be on an 89-point pace. And I was like, that seems like Ray Bork levels. And it is.
Right.
I went back and looked at it. So from 1987 to 1987 to 1994, Bork won the Norris 5 times. He averaged 92 points per 82 games over those seasons. And so, like, Carlson's right there. A third of his points have come off the power play. That doesn't feel too high to the point where it would disqualify him. I usually am in the same line of thinking that you are in terms of looking at like the overall skill and all of that. And I think when you're giving out a defensive trophy, typically it should, defense should play a pretty big a role in consideration. But I just feel like it's such a historic season offensively, or it was, that he deserves a nod there. And I think, it's easy to forget, like, you should still get credit for being good offensively too, where it's like, that's part, if he's scoring goals or if he's helping them score goals, that's, the objective of the game is still to score more than the other team.
That is true. Yeah.
You're doing your job either way. So I like Carlson there. So.
Okay.
What about Vesna? So
Vesna, I had Connor Hellebuck.
I do, so we can just
that one felt like a layup. He faces a firing squad all the time. I mean, in terms of players, not skaters, but just the Winnipeg Jets roster as a whole, like, they're not even sniffing a playoff spot without him. He's league leader in games played, shots against, and saves, and he has a .922 save percentage. Like, that's absurd. So I think, to me, there was really not much of an argument here.
Yeah, I look at this one where it's like, if I was filling out a Hart Trophy ballot, he at least would be top 5 for me.
Yeah.
Maybe even a finalist in the top 3.
He'll get Hart votes. Like,
I
don't think he'll be top 3, but he could finish like 5th.
Yeah. So, and I was looking at it, and not a whole lot to add. Coincidentally, and maybe unfortunately for him and for the Jets, depending on how this thing goes down, he had been aces lately. He had won 5 of his last 6 starts, had 2 shutouts in that stretch, a .957 save percentage. He was playing out of his mind when the season ended. And I guess, just looking around at other people's award projections and predictions and picks and stuff, I saw Tuukka Rask's name come up a lot, and Tuukka probably will finish second, I suppose. Maybe Kemper, I don't know. Kemper kind of slow.
Yeah, I think Kemper flamed out a little bit, but I do think, and I mentioned this in the story too, that I feel this year's Vesna votes will kind of show us what direction things are heading in, because teams have become increasingly more dependent on those using their 2 goalies just about as equally as possible. And should guys get hit in terms of end of the season awards because they split time. Now, I think it was Rask had played 41 games and Jaro Halak had played 31 by the time the season paused. So it was a little bit more lopsided than last year, where I think it was 42 and 40 in the regular season. But from a pure numbers perspective, it's kind of tough to argue against Tuukka Rask, and the fact that, I mean, especially early in the year, he kept the Bruins in so many games.
Right.
Like the Bruins aren't even close to the record that they have without the way Rask played at the beginning of the year. But he also is playing twice a week if you have a 4-game week. So at what point do you hold that against him? Because should Ben Bishop be in the conversation, but he's also splitting time with Anton Khudobin. And that's why the guy I had my ballot in terms of top 3 would be Hellebuck, Rask, and then Andrei Vasilevsky, who I don't necessarily think Vasilevsky's been the 3rd best goaltender this season, but he's shouldered quite a load for Tampa. I think he's 2nd in the league in terms of games played, and he still put up good enough numbers.
Yeah. I forget what point I was going to make. So, Rask was playing pretty well when this thing shut down.
It was, yeah.
But, like, the usage numbers probably would look even more lopsided because they weren't going to play a whole lot of meaningful hockey.
No, right. Like, I think Halak would have caught up to him in terms of games played. We would have seen a lot of him down the stretch.
And as it stood, when the NHL hit its pause, Rask, this is staggering to me. I looked up, compared him to Hellebuck. Hellebuck has 17 more starts than Rask does.
Yeah, it's insane.
What is that? A 5th of the season, a 4th of the season? I can't do math. And right in there. So it's a pretty wide gap. So
well, and he's played well enough too, where it's like I don't feel like I'm voting for him just for workload. Like the workload's what grabbed my attention, but the fact that he has been a .922 save percentage, like as productive as he's been, and the amount of shots that he's faced, he has done very well. So for me, he ran right away with it.
That, I mean, they would probably be in the playoffs. So I mean, all right, what else? What else you got? You want to do Jack Adams, Coach of the Year?
Sure. Let's do Jack Adams. I had John Tortorella.
I did too.
Yeah, I also wanted to vote for my runners-up were Mike Sullivan and Paul Maurice. I guess to start with Maurice, I mean, that's a guy who him and Hellebuck, it's probably Hellebuck is the number one reason the Jets are even near a playoff spot. Maurice is 1A. I mean, he's got a bunch of guys that don't want to play in Winnipeg to no fault of his. He lost Trouba, Myers, and Ben Sherratt in the offseason. He has Dustin Byfuglien holding out. And then Dustin Byfuglien's like, nah, I'm all set. It's clear that Patrick Laine doesn't really want to play there because he'll only accept a bridge deal. And still, he managed to find a way to put that team in a position to be successful. Now, similarly, John Tortorella's Blue Jackets are not only did they lose their franchise goaltender in Bobrovsky and a franchise talent in Artemi Panarin, plus Matt Duchene, plus Ryan Dzingel, they've also dealt with a ton of injuries. They have guys who, this might be a little strong, but probably have no business playing in the NHL right now, playing 15 minutes a night. And he's somehow managed to survive with Elvis Merzlikins as his starting goaltender because Jonas Korpisalo was hurt for a bunch of the year. So the fact that he has that team, gunning for a Metropolitan Division spot in the playoffs as the 3rd seed is insane when you consider everything that they lost.
Right. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, you kind of hit it all nail on the head there. Yeah, I'm trying to think of any other arguments. You know what? It's weird. Cooper probably deserves some consideration as
the way he got him to rebound, sure. And yeah. I don't know if this go ahead.
They were coming off of you go one of two ways there, right? It's kind of the Cassidy thing where it's you're coming off of who knows how you're going to respond, and they didn't respond very well at first, but they turned it around. And now they're probably arguably the best team in hockey.
Yeah, and I don't know if that makes me a jerk for how I look at it, but it's the Lightning should have been as good as they've ended up being, and the Bruins, okay, they're exceeding expectations a little bit, but they still should have been a pretty solid hockey team this year. They didn't have any notable departures from a team that was 60 minutes from a Stanley Cup last year, so it's tough for me to look at that and be like, oh well, he had the best team. So I think in terms of the hand that each coach had been dealt, Tortorella has done the best with very little. Because Mike Sullivan's been in a similar position in Pittsburgh where he's dealt with injury after injury after injury, but at the same time, he has a little bit more star power than the Blue Jackets do.
Yeah. So, any other ones? I know you do GM of the year.
I did. I had Joe Sakic. That one's tough to choose right now because we had a week and a half, 2 weeks after the trade deadline. The comparison I made was Don Sweeney winning last year. Like, okay, he built his case in the offseason by signing Jarl Halak. That proved to be a big one. He got John Moore. He got Chris Wagner. He got Joakim Nordstrom. But, I mean, what do you think probably sold it for people when they were voting, or the voters, or the PWHA doesn't vote for this. I believe it's the broadcasters, or I forget who votes for GM of the year. But what do you think they were probably looking at is the fact that he got Charlie Coyle and Marcus Johansson without mortgaging the future. So for me, I figured Joe Sakic probably did the best in terms of, I don't know, that was another team that dealt with a ton of injuries, and he built enough of a group there that they really didn't drop off even without, each of their top line guys had missed time this season. And he got Andre Burakovsky, which is a good deal. He, Nazem Kadri didn't play as much as he probably could have, but you looked at what Tyson Barrie's done in Toronto this season. It's tough to think, well, he really didn't lose all that much by getting rid of Tyson Barrie. He let Semyon Varlamov walk, and he signed Pavel Francouz or Francois, or however you pronounce it, who effectively took over the starting job from Philip Grubauer, all while making 80% less than what Varlamov's making in New York. So, and he got Vladislav Nemestikov for cheap from the Senators at the trade deadline. So that would have been one to see how it panned out. But I don't know. For me, it had to have been Sakic.
Sure. Yeah. Jeff Gordon.
Yeah, that was one of my runners up.
Springfield College shout out there. So.
True. Yeah. Tough night to let that skew our decision making.
Yeah. So, all right. Any other awards? I don't think there is.
Calder.
What's that?
Calder.
Calder, right? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I think I know who you probably chose for Calder.
I would just go Cale Makar blindly.
Yeah. I'm sure he did. It's again 2-horse race, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And me, this is probably the one I had the toughest time with, and I landed with Quinn Hughes basically because I went and I looked back at this might be an imperfect argument. I'll fully accept that, but I looked at the numbers of their defensive partners. So Quinn Hughes most often plays with Chris Tanev, and Chris Tanev's numbers without Hughes in terms of Corsi and like high danger chances were significantly worse than when he was playing with Hughes. And Makar was playing with Ryan Graves, who, while he dropped off without Makar, it was not a totally significant drop off.
Right.
And so for me, I went with Hughes. It was kind of tough, but the offensive numbers are there for both of them. And then my other runner-up I have was Merzlikins from Columbus.
Yeah, I had no problem with Hughes, and I think if Makar had played close to an 82-game schedule, with not counting for the pause, but also the injury and stuff, he'd probably, I think it'd be a much easier. I think the numbers would be so staggering compared to everybody else that you'd have to vote for him, but I think the injury kind of neutralizes the field. So
yeah, because the offensive numbers probably are about the same if they're playing the same amount. Now, I will say,
Makar had 50 points in 57 games, and Hughes has 53 points in 68 games. So, Makar probably would have ran by him. Maybe.
That's a good point. Makar does get a lot more offensive zone starts too.
And I think that's a better offensive team too, so he's probably picking up, points here and there. So, all right, that was a wonderful exercise. All right, let's get into the interesting stuff. Well, not that wasn't interesting.
Wait, hold on. You skipped the Selke.
Did I skip? I knew it. I knew I was going to forget one.
I think that's the last one that we have.
Yeah, this is
Unless you want to talk about the Lady Bing.
No, the lady. Selke, go ahead.
I don't know how anybody votes on that.
I feel like a jerk. What was your Selke award?
I had Sean Couturier with Bergeron and Anthony Cirelli running up. The Flyers are just such a better defensive team when Couturier is on the ice. And he's been good for a while. He's got a fantastic face-off percentage. his shots against are low when he's on the ice. High danger chances against are low. Even if you use the eye test, it's, they're just Philly's a better team defensively with him on the ice. And I don't know how spicy this take is. I think Anthony Cirelli is heading in the direction over the next few years where he'll be like Patrice Bergeron and Anze Kopitar, where every year he's a finalist for it. But that's just me. Who did you have?
I guess this was a tough one. I would have to go, I looked it up, looked all the numbers. Couturier is probably the pick. I would make an argument for Ryan O'Reilly just because they've been so good. But he's now on that Bergeron level where he's so good it almost counts against him, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Where it's just we know how good you are. But I mean, that's, he's been one of the best players on one of the best teams and continues to just be a monster on both ends of the ice. I also tried to make a case in my head for Marchand because I've kind of been banging that drum all year. But it's it's the same thing we were talking about Draisaitl earlier. It's, your line mate almost hurts you in that situation where it's, who gets the credit for his defensive numbers? Does he actually get it, or does Bergeron get credit for it? And I think Marchand probably gets more credit than he actually should get more credit than he gets. And I think you look at
he really took off as penalty killer.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. The penalty killing has been it feels like, anecdotally, especially from somebody who watches them up close every night, it feels like he has an odd man rush on the penalty kill every game. Yeah. And that's in addition to just the little things that he's doing on the penalty kill. But if I was casting a vote, I find it hard to say well, the guy's really good on the penalty kill, that's why he should win the Selke. So I would probably lean towards Couturier or O'Reilly just out of habit.
I'm gonna take the temperature on this take with you. Marchand a better Hart candidate than Pastrnak?
Yes, I agree. I think Marchand is the Bruins' best player now. I don't know if that's a spicy take either.
Yeah, I think in terms of availability too, I think if you have Bergeron playing full seasons now, which not his fault. There's a lot of mileage there, but
I think even you can make even the case if they're both healthy, you get more out of Marchand offensively. That kind of they're close. I mean, because what Marchand does offensively, Bergeron almost neutralizes with his defense and vice versa or whatever. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Case could be made there for another day.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about Pastrnak there. So
no, we're not.
The fact that all three of those guys are on the same line is probably a reason why if this season ends up getting canceled, it's going to be a huge kick in the pants for the Boston Bruins. Which is a natural segue, not the kick in the pants, but the potential of a canceled season, to our next topic of discussion. As I already hinted at a little bit earlier, we're going to try to fix the NHL season, assuming we get back to hockey. And I think this is one of those things where this is going to sound lame, but I think we both are very much under the agreement that getting everybody healthy and safe is the utmost priority, and if it costs an NHL season, then that's a price that we all have to be willing to pay as a society. I think us discussing this is in no way a reflection of how lightly we're taking the situation, but it would sure be nice to have hockey again at some point this year.
Right, and I think, once we insert that caveat that if they cancel the season, they cancel the season, and that's fine, and we will all survive. That's all that matters. Why not at least go through these exercises right now? There's nothing else to really talk about, right?
Yep.
So I won't allow myself to be completely consumed by guilt for giving a crap about what happens during the NHL playoffs. If they cancel, it's fine. My life will go on. But, I'd prefer if they played them because that means that we got things figured out health-wise, right?
Exactly. All right. So there's a conference call Tuesday among all the NHL GMs, kind of just an update. According to the TSN Insider Trading Panel, Bob McKenzie said the NHL has requested teams to provide available home dates through August. So playing hockey into August is on the table. If we have playoffs, that could extend from August, maybe even into September, depending on who you ask. Also, Pierre LeBrun mentioned that the self-quarantine period has been extended. Originally, it was March 27th. which is Friday. They're now adding 10 days onto that. So what does that come out to? Second week of April. We'll kind of
March 37th.
Exactly, March 37th. Good point. Because teams are waiting to find out when they're allowed to kind of get back to practice. And I think that's the caveat too with all of these sports is that you can't just go right back into games once you get the go ahead. I think there's going to have to be something of a modified training camp or just even 2 weeks of practice, something along those lines, before you can really get guys going. LeBron also said that the NHL has reached out to its ice maintenance officials, and they are saying, it's going to be costly, but they are confident that they can do enough inside these arenas to make sure the ice is good if they have to play into August, which I think is going to be a huge issue. I mean,
yeah, it's a legitimate concern.
Boston in May, which is not, the Garden in May is the ice gets a little soupy, and that's
dicey,
not even like considering. Heaven forbid, like Florida goes on a run and you're trying to play, playoff games.
Florida and Dallas in the Cup final.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you might as well. We can get to this a little bit more. I wouldn't even rule out like a neutral site.
Yeah. I mean, if they're playing in venues without fans, what does it matter?
Yeah,
right?
go play in Lake Placid.
Like, poll the players and say, what is the best surface you play on? And say, all right, we're playing in Chicago or St. Louis or wherever.
Edmonton has good ice.
Edmonton, Winnipeg.
Right, yeah. Winnipeg probably is still 48 degrees in July anyway.
Yep, most likely, right? Right at the Bell Center,
And to be, this is what's at stake, too. In that same segment, Frank Saravelli said, and this isn't really surprising, revenue loss, you just can the whole season. They're looking at like $1 billion with a B. So
they do not want to cancel the season. I feel pretty confident saying that.
I don't blame them either. The NBA is in the same boat, obviously. I think everybody – this is the it's different than a lockout or a strike or anything like that. Like, everybody's invested here. The players, the owners, the media, the league as a general, fans, everybody is in the same boat here. So, like, finding a way to make this work benefits literally everybody. The economy, like, there's, this touches everybody. So it's going to, that's the, the balance you have to do here. So anyway, all right, we'll just run through a couple scenarios. We'll kind of rank them as we go in terms of viability, likelihood of them happening. Number one is you finish the regular season. Every team has 12 to 13 games left. Finish the regular season and then play a full playoffs. That's not going to happen.
I would say that's very unlikely to happen. The only situation I could see that happening in is President Trump, while I disagree with this assessment, says he wants to have the country back up and running around Easter. If by some complete miracle that happens, I could see them trying to do that and say, because, I mean, how many weeks would you have pushed back at that point? About 3 or 4? Like, you could still get the season done around Independence Day and play play it as is. But I would put the chances of that happening at less than 1%. So
yeah, I agree. And even if the country is back up and running, as the president says, first of all, 2 countries are involved here.
Yep.
You have players from all over the world, and it feels like the leagues and even the states within America are operating on their own accord. So even if Trump makes this sweeping declaration that the country is open for business again, I wouldn't be surprised if these leagues are like, yeah, that's fine. We're not going back yet. We aren't in this happening. So I'm with you. Less than 1%.
I think no matter what happens, we're done with the regular season.
I agree. I think the second most likely scenario here is you just freeze the entire field by playoff or point percentage and start the playoffs whenever we're ready to go. Whether that's, Elliot Friedman mentioned July is what everybody's starting to come to the realization. So maybe and he even mentioned the possibility of playing into September. So I think we're looking at this if you're going to have a full Stanley Cup playoffs, 16 teams, 7-game series, you're looking at probably spending the entire summer doing so. This still feels unlikely as well.
Yeah, I believe that the league really does not want to impact next season. I think they're looking at this situation saying this is so unprecedented and we're going to operate under the assumption that this probably will never happen at least for, decades upon decades, where it's like, if this season we just have to eat it, then fine, it is what it is. But let's not start going down this rabbit hole where we're playing the Cup final on Labor Day, and then, we're not getting training camps whipped back up until January. Because, I mean, there's an effect here, right? There's going to be a ripple effect where if you keep playing too late, guys aren't going to want to just, even with the break they're having now, you think some team is going to want to come back after having after having played a complete Stanley Cup playoffs and then say, all right, we're ready to go by December 1st or whatever. I mean, the only situation I could see them doing this with is if they resign themselves to the fact that next season would be like the lockout shortened season in 2013. You say, we're going to play 48 games in quick succession from January through April, and then the postseason will be pushed back about a week or two later than it otherwise would be. And then you cram in the rest of the season from July to September. But that, I really don't think they want to do that.
Well, that was, and I don't know, I kind of zoned out. I was looking up something else. Did you mention free agency in there?
No, I didn't. I didn't even get to that.
So that was the thing, too, is that I think this was on his 31 Thoughts podcast today, Wednesday, that Friedman and Jeff Merrick were talking about going, awarding the Cup in September if you have to having them month off, and then going straight into next season, no all-star game, no bye weeks, and playing 82 games where you're kind of probably going into late or at least mid-summer 2021. So that's just insane to think about too. But and Merrick brought it up, what about free agency? You're going to do 2 weeks of free agency and have, players move cities, their families, and start school in September to get the season started in mid-October.
Yeah, now, granted, I mean, I guess you could make the argument, I'm not advocating for this, but you could say that's not going to impact most teams, right? 16 teams are going to be done once the season starts.
Sure,
but at the same time, that is going to ruin a lot of things. And then you look at how slowly the RFA markets have moved the last couple of years. I mean, so many guys haven't signed until well into September because teams don't want to be the first one to budge. And so are you going to see a bunch of owners and GMs get pissed because they had to rush through free agency and they're signing these RFAs to these whopping contracts that had they been able to wait it out 2 or 3 months like they have the past couple of years, they would have been able to get something a little bit more agreeable to them. I can see the team side of things arguing that. It's just they're not going to jam free agency into 10 to 14 days.
Maybe they should, though.
Okay.
Well, no, because it's Andrew, I think Andrew Brandt's his name. He used to work in the Packers front office, and he's a big sports business guy on Twitter now. He brings this up a lot. Is deadlines spur activity. You know what I mean? So if if you have 2 weeks, you got 2 weeks, and you got to move fast, and you're going to see activity. Because nobody's going to, teams are going to want to fill their rosters, and players are going to want to have a place to play. So, but that I don't think that's good. That's not something I would be.
I will say, and it'll probably, at least from a team perspective, ruin things going forward, right? Because then in ensuing years, players and their agents are going to say, well, we managed to get this done in 10 days last year. Why are we just continuously kicking the can down the road here so that you can try and talk us down in terms of our AAVs?
Right,
so.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some more not off the wall, but whatever, different scenarios. Merrick actually brought this up. What about going home until September and then playing the playoffs in September and then into December, and you're going to cut is this what you said? Is this basically what you said?
I don't think so.
So basically the playoffs start in September.
Yeah, I was operating under the impression that playoffs start in July.
Yeah, I don't think – it's an interesting idea, but I wouldn't do that. So and that would also affect the desire to play 82 games next year. So
Right.
All right. The one thing that I do think this has been bandied about, I think Chris Johnson had this first with Sportsnet. Basically, it was a 24-team tournament where – and you and I were kind of kicking this around, and I looked up, and it was the exact same thing that he was saying. But basically, you have a play-in tournament for the bubble teams. You go off a point percentage. So the top 4 teams by point percentage in each conference get a bye into the actual playoffs. and then the next 8 teams in each conference go nuts, and they play either 1-game playoffs or 3-game series to get to set the field. I think this is probably the fairest way to do it and probably the most likely.
I would agree.
Anytime.
Well, and as I was telling you earlier when we were chatting about this on the phone, like this all depends on Gary Bettman and the Board of Governors, let's call it their pain tolerance, right? Because the product is probably not going to be fantastic out of the chute. Now, people will be craving hockey. They'll be excited to see anything. But say this stuff doesn't start until, mid-May or June. You're going to have teams that haven't played in 2 months. Then all of a sudden they're playing 1 game to decide their season. That said, this is, again, such an unusual situation where they've got to be willing to kind of get crazy a little bit. And I think you can't look at, let's use the Eastern Conference. Right now, the wild card teams would be Carolina and Columbus. The teams that are within a point or 2 of them that are right on the outside of the picture, I don't know how you can look at the Islanders or the Rangers or the Panthers, especially since those teams have games in hand on Columbus, with the exception of the Rangers, and say, yeah, sorry, like we're just freezing it here. Like there will be an uproar if that happens. So I think they have to come up with some little tournament, do it with the points percentage where there's a playing game. All right, the product's probably going to be crap, but give them a week to practice, a week to get back up to speed. They could do like the Bruins did last year at the inter-squad scrimmage to try and get some sort of game feeling. And then, you just have to acknowledge that this is an unusual situation and that things are going to be weird and the product isn't going to be as good as it's going to be, especially off the jump.
Yeah, and it's not going to matter because people are going to be so desperate to have hockey, playoff hockey back, have any sport of any kind back, that I don't think it's going to matter. It's going to be an imperfect scenario or system no matter what you do, but you got to find a way to get something back on the ice if it's deemed healthy. I think this one makes all the sense in the world because it just happens to work out that the top 24 teams in the league right now are all 500 or better. Like there's a perfect 500 point percentage cutoff there that you can take, and it works out. It almost works out like it's meant to be. Like it's nuts looking at it. And the last 2 teams in each conference, Montreal in the East and Chicago in the West, like you're getting original 6 franchises in there.
Right.
And you're going to get Montreal versus Pittsburgh or something like that in that first round, whatever it's going to be. Like it works out well. It's made for TV. They have to, I would suggest redoing the TV thing. I don't know if you can do that on the fly, or if you get, this is selfishly too from our company's perspective, but like give the RSNs more, coverage, allow them, whether it's an in-market blackouts, whatever it's going to be, get weird, get as creative as you can and try to fix this thing in the short term to help you out in the long term.
I think they will. And I think you have to operate under the impression that's like, we're going to bank on this not happening again, or at least in our lifetimes, to where it's like, let's get nuts. Let's do some crazy stuff that we wouldn't have otherwise done.
And I think this is wishful thinking, but kind of like I said, if it, you're not going to recoup your losses, but you're probably going to do better than you expect just because people are going to be so desperate for it.
Well, and it's better than not playing at all, right?
Yeah.
My guess, hard cutoff date, I think it's June 1st. I think if they're not clear to go until June 1st, we're not getting a hockey season.
I agree, but I think we're going to have hockey and basketball into the summer, assuming this thing doesn't get a whole lot worse, which is still on the table, unfortunately. But you can only take it day by day at this point, so we'll see. Yeah. That's it for us, I think. Hopefully we'll be back to preview that at some point, but in the meantime, you and I are going to kind of kick around some ideas. I know we have something on tap for next week to have a podcast up and ready, so we'll try to get creative. Maybe we'll reach out to some people on our Rolodexes and try to come up with some off the wall ideas moving forward to keep the NESN Bruins Podcast going. So.
Cool.
Anything else, Logan?
No, that's all, Mike. You stay safe.
You too, bud.
Everyone else stay safe.
Definitely. We will talk soon.